What's up guys, welcome back to episode 8 of the pre-production series for my animated short film, The Alleyway. In the previous episode, I mentioned how I wanted to experiment with the workflow similar to the one used in the Netflix series Arcane. I really loved how unique and stylized their visuals are. They use a hybrid animation approach, blending both 2D and 3D techniques to achieve a painterly style. Obviously, I can't just copy and paste the exact process, because if I did, I would probably never finish making this film. So I needed to find a way to paint unique textures into my scenes without the process taking forever. That's when I stumbled upon a YouTube video by this artist who managed to create a paint system inside Blender. Essentially, it allows you to paint directly onto 3D models using custom brushes. And the best part, you can paint all around the object. That means if I have any scenes where the camera moves, the textures won't pop off into 3D space like they do with the grease pencil. The paint system this artist created is very similar to Photoshop, so understanding how to use it wasn't hard at all. Shout out to the artist for making the system free to download. I'll leave a link to his video in the description. After downloading and installing, I had to try it out, so I quickly made a basic scene using cubes. And I literally could not believe how simple and easy the system was to use. No grease pencil, no geometry nodes, just toggling the system in the viewport and jumping straight into adding textures. After that, I had to see what I could really do with this paint system, so I decided to create a more detailed scene. Before I get into the scene, I think it's worth mentioning how much time I invest into each step of this film. When you're doing everything solo, it's always worth finding quicker ways to get things done. So in this scene, I tried something different from my usual workflow. Instead of modeling everything from scratch, I decided to download free 3D models and assemble them into a scene before using the paint system to texture them. That way I save a ton of time while keeping creative control over the final look of the film. Because honestly, the thought of modeling every single part of the entire film by myself sounds fucking insane. So I went into Blender Kit and Polyhaven to search for models. I already had an idea of what the scenes should look like, so I downloaded a few assets, threw them into Blender and started working. This part was actually the easiest step. It was just a matter of moving objects around and organizing them in a way that made the composition look interesting. Then I added the buildings for the background. Now Polyhaven and Blender Kit have a lot of assets, but I quickly realized that most of the good ones were either paid for or came with usage restrictions. I was only able to download a few models and just one building. So while these websites help give me a slight boost, anything that they don't have, I'll definitely have to create from scratch. Once the scene was put together, it was time for the fun part, adding the textures. For this, I just did whatever came to mind. It was completely an experimental process since I had never done this before. And even though I said earlier that the system wasn't hard to understand, I was struggling. I couldn't even figure out how to change the brush size half the time. There were also moments where I had to completely retexture an object because it wasn't turning out how I had imagined or wanted. This was by far the most challenging part of the whole process, and honestly it still is. I'm just learning as I go. Painting, especially layering shades of color, is something I need to master as soon as possible. I also need to plan out color schemes ahead of time instead of just winging it as I go, but that will come with practice. Also, I think I'm going to have to completely redo the ground because it looks way too much like a PS2 game from the early 2000s. The same goes for this building. I was super indecisive about how to paint it, but perfection wasn't the goal. I'm just happy I got it done. Once the texturing was done, I moved on to lighting. Now I played around with the lights for a little bit, but I'll be honest, I had no clue what I was doing. I didn't know how to set up the lighting in a way that would actually enhance the scene. That's definitely something I need to study because it'll become super important in the production phase of the film. But this is all I have for now, and this is how I plan to take on the challenge of making this film. I'm about to wrap up the pre-production and I can't wait to finally start the production bit of the process, where I'll finally get to animate and bring this whole film to life. That's all for today. See you next week. Peace.